Hi again, everybody. I'm Jamie Allison, and this is the Big Idea, Big Moves podcast. This is the destination for high performers. We talk to people from different genres, different niches, people just doing really cool things in their space. So we talk to CEOs, we talk to entrepreneurs, athletes, scientists, people that are really just making a big impact in their area. Find out a little bit about their story and their journey, and see if there are some things that that you can take away as an audience member to be able to apply to your own lives. And I know we have one of those today. Really excited today about having Alim Dhanji. He's the president of Adidas Canada, where he's responsible for retail, e-commerce, wholesale business, and everything from business development and brand strategy to operations for both Adidas and Reebok across Canada. So really cool there. Before that, which I know we're going to go into a little bit, is that he was the SVP of Global Talent and Head of HR for Global Brands. And he was recently recognized, I know, on the 100 Outstanding LGBTQ plus executives role model list, which is really cool as well. He's worked for other big brands, ones that are a little bit different than he's currently in, so places like TD Bank and Citi. So really cool things to take a look there. I know it's been really crazy busy, I think, for you so far, but thanks, Alim, for taking the time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Jamie. I've listened to some of the other podcasts you've done, and it's great to be in such amazing company. So I'm very fortunate for the invitation. I appreciate it.
No problem at all. And thank you again for jumping in. I mean, we were talking just before we went on here about how you kind of jumped in as in that president role at the start of something that has gone on for quite a while. So there's probably the challenge of that, but also how's it been even just going through this through a pandemic and having to transfer into a new role at that time? That's a pretty important one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know any leader out there that can claim that this is not the toughest year to be a leader. You know, when you're leading teams virtually during a pandemic, and there's no template available for that, it just requires different muscles to exercise. And then changing jobs, moving countries during that period certainly added complexity. But it's been actually a very seamless transition despite everything that's happening, and I have a fantastic team who's helping me on board over the last year, so I've been quite lucky.
Now the one thing that is a little bit different, and people I think would find it both intriguing but also probably inspiring, is that you've done a few things in your career that you can see where it's been a little more not the traditional path, I guess. And so I'll say before that you were kind of in that HR type of role and moved into the top leadership role. To a lot of people, that might seem intuitive that talent right now, especially, is so important, but it's not necessarily. You don't see it tons as of yet. And maybe I'll just find out a little bit about, you know, how did that work for you? How did you make sure that you were kind of ready for that next role and you were an option, I guess, being kind of that talent kind of expert?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, throughout my career, I've had a passion for people and influencing the agenda, the business strategy agenda, through making sure the best people decisions are being made and there's the right culture for accelerating performance. But I always found myself stepping outside of HR for brief periods and coming back to HR. So, you know, I stepped out the first time and worked in a finance role. I went into an M&A type of role. I went into operations, but always found myself coming back to HR. And I just feel that it's such an amazing opportunity to influence how you can cultivate a high performance organization and help businesses to excel. And now that I'm in a GM type of role, general management type of role, what I'm finding is all the capabilities I developed as an HR leader are exactly what I'm I guess suppose stronger in and able to lean in a more authentic way. So definitely complementary, and I'd love to see more HR leaders taking that transition. You may have heard Lena Nair from Unilever, who was a CHRO there, just became CEO of Chanel. And I've seen many more of those instances. So it actually bodes quite well that HR leaders have that opportunity to be business leaders.
What do you think has been kind of the barrier up till now in being able to do that? Whether it's from an HR capability standpoint, or is it more of a just whether or not the focus was there as much on senior leadership as it is maybe right now, where people is such a huge impact because of the pandemic and all the things happening in the environment. What do you think has been the barrier in the past?
I think partly mindset, and more progressive companies have realized the importance of that HR leadership role and how they can actually have greater influence in an organization. But the mindset I've observed has shifted fairly in the last 2 years. With the pandemic, when you think about the topics that are at the board level are really around future of work, ESG, social justice, digitization, because e-com took off in so many businesses, it really flipped the way operating models needed to evolve. And so the role of HR leader and their teams, I think, was just propelled. And many CEOs and leaders that I speak to have recognized that the critical role of HR in an organization. So I think that's created an open window, and those that have business acumen, have that curiosity, are able to jump into that space more readily.
Yeah, and one of the other things I think that has really come, yeah, I mean, you mentioned a bit there, and I know that your organization has really pushed that is kind of diversity and inclusion and those things, and maybe if you could talk to us a little bit about that, and but maybe I guess how are you making sure that it is integrated, whatever you're doing at Adidas, how do you make sure that it's not just a program, that it's actually turns into the way things are being done? How's that working from your leadership?
Yeah, so we have, every organization has values and cultural beliefs. For us, we are grounded in what we call our 3 C's: creativity, confidence, and collaboration. And we've got so many proof points of how we bring that to life within the way we behave with each other as colleagues, what we celebrate, what we don't tolerate. And then we've sharpened over the last couple of years our investments in being a much more inclusive organization. And again, it's part of our DNA. When you think about our consumers and how we show up as a brand and what moments we celebrate, inclusivity is woven in our fabric. And so it's not a leap from how we show up internally versus how we show up externally. But it does take commitment. It does take a drive for the leadership team to spend more time listening. And throughout the last couple of years, especially as the world has woken up to social justice more so in a positive way, we've spent a lot of time listening to our teams and understanding what their lived experience is, and then we're responding with programs, policies, investments internally and externally. And I think that's what's creating the drive for inclusion.
Well, and you've mentioned there the last couple of years in particular, it's been out there, and I would say, I think in sports in particular, and a lot of specific sports, it's been a little bit slower to change around culture and some of those things. Have you seen change kind of happening from that outside of kind of your company and what's happening in sports in general? And do you have any thoughts on kind of what will help maybe move that along a little faster? Like how do you make some real change in some areas, and I would say some sports, that really the culture has to change pretty considerably?
Yeah, so I have seen some change. I think we certainly want to see a change faster and break down some of the systemic barriers. There are athletes that I speak to on a regular basis that are from the BIPOC community, and someone myself, shares an experience where when you're growing up in a perhaps underprivileged area and you don't have the wealth and family, having the resources, for example, to play hockey or equestrian or sports that require more funding, are systemically biased against those communities. And so I think breaking those barriers and helping people to discover new sports and different sports is really important. I'm seeing more action from large companies in helping to do that. But I think we still have a long way to go to create greater inclusion. I would say, brands like Adidas are helping to change the game, and investments that they're making in product for example, for women to be more comfortable and have the right type of kit to play sport helps to raise confidence and let them be better athletes. So breaking barriers is a big part of the agenda that we are helping to lead.
Now you've also done executive roles, and you've traveled a lot with your in different countries. Do you see a lot of are there a lot of differences country to country as to how progressive that is, or is it an issue in most countries?
I think every country has a different maturity in terms of embracing inclusivity. But overall, directionally, what I'm observing is a movement for the better. I'm not seeing too many countries regress. Now, I also don't, can't speak on every country in the world, but for the most part, I'm optimistic. I'm seeing change. I just wish the change would be perhaps a little faster, whether it's for women in sport, LGBTQ, different groups, for them to break down barriers.
Yeah. And so moving to things personally, because I mean, obviously, when you're an executive, most people know that's a real balance to start with, but you have a family, you have children, all of those things. How has that been for you? Like how do you kind of balance the kind of heavy part of being in a executive role with also being having your own fitness and wellness and then family? How do you do that?
I think there is no answer. I'm still searching for the answer. What I can say is I do what I feel is right for my health and for my family first, but also my commitment, my dedication, and my passion for what I do at Adidas is also very important to me. And so it's trying to find that personal balance, which on some days weighs more on my work commitments, and on some days it weighs more on my family time. So there is no single answer, I'm afraid. I think it's more about being true to yourself and understanding what's most important, and then figuring out how to prioritize and balance. I think the old adage of "it takes a village" is still very true. Yeah. I've got a wonderful partner who helps me find that balance, and my kids are 7 and 4. So they're at a moment where they do want to spend time with me. I'm sure when they get to the teenage years, it's going to be less though. So I prioritize this time. I do enjoy making breakfast for them in the morning, and that's time that's prized for me. So I carve that out, and I don't take calls during that time. I think you've got to figure out sort of rules of engagement for yourself. And if I, for the most part, at least my colleagues understand that, and we work through it.
And so I guess it'd be interesting to know when you set, you have your goals you set for the organization, totally get that, but yourself, how do you, like, are you I'm going to write down my kind of, my own personal goals, whether those be career goals or whatever they are you the kind of person who writes them down and moves that forward, or are you just, you kind of let it flow as you go?
No, I'm a bit geeky that way,
Yeah.
to be honest. Just a little joke. I've moved a number of times, so I feel like I've left boxes at different families' homes, and so my uncle brought back a computer to me that weighed like a brick. But it's interesting. I opened it up. It's probably a 10-year-old, and I found a spreadsheet with some of my career goals.
Yeah.
And thankfully, I'm tracking well against that spreadsheet. But I think it's important to dream. I think it's important to understand what makes you happy and what type of aspirations you wanna chase, and then you can actually have a plan. You can create a plan that has different building blocks and understand the critical experiences. So I took a very academic approach to it, perhaps, that when I used to daydream when I was 20, and I said, okay, I want this role. I would actually go online at those days monster.com or
Yeah.
other job boards, and I would find a job that actually excited me. And I would look at all the capabilities that are needed. And I said, okay, here I am. Here's what I need. What kind of tours of duty do I need to have? Critical experiences that I need to collect. And that would become my career plan. And so I went very structured in that approach. I think that's helpful because then you can also share that with others. And I find for the most part, people will help you and give you feedback on how to get those goals.
And did you find like it's interesting that you've been able to see that far back. Did you find you really kind of changed as you matured and changed over time? Do those goals really kind of shift? Like, did you see some things thinking, wow, okay, I can see at that point I really wanted to do that, but now that would not interest me whatsoever? Like, did you see much of that, or do you do much of that over time?
Yeah, I guess what I didn't forecast for myself was making as many cross-functional moves as I've made. Or moving as many countries as I always had an interest in international, in fact, a very deep interest. Yeah. But if you were talking to the 20-year-old me, I don't think that at that point I would say I was going to live in 6 different countries.
Yeah.
And then, quite frankly, when things change, you have big life moments. My first daughter, and then I have a son. You just have to recognize that that treadmill needs to slow down a bit. And your priorities shift, and you have new perspectives. So you need to be able to be agile with your career plan as well.
How important has your international experience been to you in being able to be where you are today? I mean, I know a lot of organizations have really put a lot of emphasis on trying to have that before you kind of go into those executive roles, especially if it's a international company. How has that helped you so far?
I think it's been hugely important and almost foundational in the way that I think about global mindset, innovation, empathy. I think I can be a stronger leader because I understand different ways of doing things. And it's not necessarily that, because I lived in Hong Kong, that I understand best practices in Hong Kong or Asia. It's more that you develop an appreciation of how you can solve problems in a different way, not just the Western ideology, but there are different ideologies out there. And I think that's been invaluable. And it's not just as Hong Kong, whether it was in Germany, Australia, New York, you also get, absorb the local economics or political ideology at the time, and that informs your thinking as well. So if you're a person that thrives on that type of learning, it's invaluable. You just can't learn that in an MBA or a book.
Yeah. Well, so there's probably, I mean, one thing that we ask everybody who comes on the show is a couple of actionable things, and I think they've probably taken lots of those away already, Alim, but I'm sure there are lots of people that are thinking that they want to either make that next move, or whether it's a cross-functional move, whether it's maybe coming out of an industry into another industry, which may seem, difficult to do. From your experience, I mean, you've been successful at it for a long time. Are there a couple of things somebody could do right away to start that process, to kind of kickstart and being able to maybe move into that other cross-functional or broader role?
Yeah, I think first of all, not to be vanilla, but just have a plan, right? Don't be a little bit more purposeful around what you want to do in life, whether it's 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road. Just have a goal, and I think that when that goal is established, you can do a self-audit around what's missing. And once you have that, then you can say, well, how is a cross-functional move going to enrich you? Right. So when I talk to HR professionals who often say to me, wow, you crossed over to a P&L role, that never happens. How can I do that? It's rare that at senior levels that you can make that crossover because the risk is higher. And so in my case, I was able to establish and create some trust with our senior leadership team, and certainly the CEO felt that there's leadership capability that I could port over. So I think building that trust and understanding who the decision makers are and helping them to see the unique qualities that you can offer is always a great thing. I don't shy away with sharing my ambitions with colleagues and or senior decision makers, because only then can they help you. They can spot opportunities, assignments, projects that would help you get that critical experience. So have a plan, share that plan, work that plan. And working that plan is not just on internal, but also think about how externally you might have an opportunity to sit on a board. Maybe there's a course, be part of networks. Anything that you can do to help yourself close those gaps is really important. And then finally, I will say, be self-critical, but also understand what your timeline is. And this is where I find people get a lot of angst, especially when I talk to internal folks within companies that I've worked at. They resign. And when you resign and go through an exit interview and you say, well, your plan was this, but they never had communicated that I want to achieve this in 18 months. Mm-hmm. And if your timeline does not match with your manager's timeline or your organization's timeline, then you're going to get it to an impasse. So I always encourage people, be upfront about that, and then be open to being reasonable, because sometimes to develop that critical experience, it may require a little bit more time. But that honesty, I think, leads to a more constructive career development discussion.
And just one other thing is that mentors. Did you have, coming kind of through that path? I mean, I'm sure there's people you look to be able to do that. People probably look to you in that way now, but was that something that played a big role for you, and as you kind of have tracked through your career?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, I've worked at a number of companies, and people that I've met along the way continue to be my mentor. And so for me, mentorship is really situational. Sometimes people have one individual that they trust and they go back to that person, over and over again. I kind of democratize that relationship and say, okay, this person in my organization is so well regarded for X that I'm going to go to that person to get that advice. But I'll go to someone also quite junior in our organization to help me understand how to master TikTok. I'm just being, facetious here, but I think mentorship comes from all kinds of angles. I think what's most important is the underlying basis, which is be vulnerable, be open to learning, and be humble. And that's for me has been the holy grail, I think. As I've switched over industries, functions, and I've gone from corporate to startup, each time you have to reinvent yourself. And if you go in with ego or look what I've done, you're not going to get anywhere fast, and no one's going to want to help you, quite frankly. But if you show your vulnerability, but also what you have so that you have the credibility to lead, I think that people will surround you and want you to succeed. At least that's been my experience, and I've been very grateful for those people.
Yeah, well, it's refreshing that you kind of bring up that whole piece of being humble and being able to make sure that that comes across in your interactions with people. As a leader, that's incredible to be able to kind of keep that relationship over time. I mean, you can come in and maybe have an impact quickly, but that goes away pretty quickly if you don't have that approach. So thank you very much for taking all of the time and being able to provide so much great advice and tips through this. If people are trying to kind of follow what's going on with you, Alim, and also obviously with Adidas, what are some of the best ways of being able to do that?
Yeah, my TikTok game is still in the works, so I'm not going to advertise that. But certainly LinkedIn, I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I try whenever I have time to put out some thought leadership. But I'm always interested in meeting interesting people and connecting with them on LinkedIn.
Great. Okay. And what we'll do is we'll put that on the show notes, so that way, if you do want to connect and follow, and there's some great stuff. I mean, lately you've I know had some really good stuff about how tough this is on organizations and people feeling, the resiliency stuff as we're going through this. So some really great things that that people can take away from as well. So if you haven't hit subscribe on the podcast, do that right now, because we have great people every week, just like Alim. And so again, thank you for taking the time out of your busy day, and good luck over this year as you kind of keep the ball rolling on your new role, Alim. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much. I've enjoyed our chat, and I appreciate you having me.
All right. And to everybody else, we will talk again on Big Idea, Big Moves.